This is the discussion of this 2019 A-level Economics MCQ paper. Look at this question 26. Which of the following will lead to a decrease in economy's money supply? The first option says a decrease in income tax rate. So we get income tax and the tax rate decreases. When income tax rate decreases, what happens? The amount of money that is circulated among general public, right? The amount of money that is circulated among general public increases. Even people will deposit more and more money in commercial banks. So bank deposits, right? Bank deposits will also increase if income tax rate is decreased. So if you remember the definition, there are several definitions for money supply, but if you just look at the basic one, M1 money supply, this is about the currency in circulation among the general public plus demand deposits held in commercial banks. So what happens as a result of decreasing this income tax? Both these components of money supply increase. See, when income tax rate is decreased, the currency in circulation among the general public increases, even the demand deposits increases. So that finally what will happen? The money supply in the economy will increase. But what needs to happen according to the question? The money supply should decrease. But as a result of this first one, money supply increases. So we don't take that to be the answer there. Second one, the second one says decrease in discount rate. What is this discount rate? This is the rate applicable when commercial banks obtain loans from the central bank. So this, what happens to the discount rate? Discount rate decreases so that the commercial banks, right? Commercial banks can obtain loans from central bank at a lower cost, right? They can obtain more and more loans from the central bank. And when they obtain more and more loans from the central bank, what will happen to their excess reserves? Their excess reserves will also go up. When excess reserves go up, their ability to create credit, right? Their ability to create credit also increases. And as a result, what happens to the money supply? Even the money supply increases. So look at this sequence. The first one, discount rate decreases. As a result, commercial banks can obtain more and more loans from the central bank at a lower cost, so that their excess reserves will increase, which means their ability to create credit increases. And when more and more credit is created in the economy, money supply will obviously increase. But what needs to happen again? The money supply should decrease. But as a result of this second one, money supply increase. So this is also not the answer. Look at this third one. It says an open market purchase of government securities by the central bank. See, when there is an open market purchase of government securities, we have on one side, let's say that we have Central Bank of Sri Lanka. And this Central Bank of Sri Lanka purchases government securities from the commercial banks, right? Central Bank of Sri Lanka purchases government securities from the commercial banks. So they purchase treasury bills and treasury bonds. And when they purchase these treasury bills and treasury bonds from the commercial banks, they transfer cash to those commercial banks. Then what will happen again? Then the excess reserves of the commercial banks will increase. When their excess reserves get increased, their ability to create credit will also increase. And as a result, like in the previous discussion, money supply will again increase. See, from these first three options, what happens to the money supply? Money supply increases, not that it decreases. Even this is not the answer. Right, now look at this fourth one. The fourth option says an increase in statutory reserve requirement, which means simply the central bank increases SRR, statutory reserve ratio. And let's see what will happen when this SRR is increased. See, SRR, the statutory reserve ratio is increased so that the commercial banks need to keep a higher amount of statutory reserve. So when they keep a higher amount of statutory reserve, what happens to their excess reserve? Excess reserve decreases. When excess reserve decreases, their ability to create credit also decreases. And as a result, what happens to the money supply? The money supply in the economy also decreases. Then this has to be the answer for this question 26, right? So when the statutory reserve requirement is increased, money supply decreases. So this is the answer. But look at the fifth one as well. The fifth option says an increase in government expenditure on goods and services. See that now? The government spend more and more money on goods and services, right? ඔයාට මතක නම් මේ government purchases අපිට තියෙන එක ප්‍රධාන දෙයක් තමයි the salaries paid to government employees. So when the government expenditure increases, the government employees receive more and more salaries. So that what will happen? The currency in circulation, currency with general public will increase, and as a result, what will happen to the money supply? Even the money supply will increase, as we discussed in the very first option, as we discussed here, right? So that as a result of this fifth option also, money supply increases, not that it decreases. So this is also not the answer, right? For question 26, fourth is the answer there, right? Look at this 27th one now. 27th one says, when an economy is at full employment, which of the following will most likely to create demand pull inflation in the short run, right? In the short run. Okay, so let's discuss it in this way. Just imagine, that the economy is operating at this point. This is the real output, and this is where you get the price level, and this is the aggregate supply curve, right? This is the aggregate supply curve, and right now the economy is operating at the full employment level of national income, which means this is where the aggregate demand is, right? This is the full employment level of national income. So right now the economy has sufficient demand, right? Aggregate demand to achieve the full employment level of national income. And see what's going to happen now. Economy is at full employment. Which of the following will most likely to create demand pull inflation? So we know that this demand pull inflation arises if the aggregate demand increases than the level that is needed to maintain this full employment level of national income, which means simply the aggregate demand increases, right? If the aggregate demand increases beyond this level, there will be a demand pull inflation in the economy, right? So you just need to figure out from which one of these options the aggregate demand will increase. An increase in the policy interest rates. See the now policy interest rates, when the central bank increases policy interest rates, in simple terms, SDFR and SLFR. When these policy interest rates are increased, what happens to the interest in general? I mean, the interest that the bank charges when the general public obtain loans, that interest, right? That interest rate also increases. When interest rate increases, the consumption and the investment decreases. It's difficult for people to obtain loans because the interest rate is high in the economy, so that they don't obtain loans and they cut their consumption, they cut their investments, and what will happen then? The aggregate demand will decrease. Why is that? Because we all know that this aggregate demand consists of these components, C plus I plus G plus NX. So when interest rate get increased, the component C and the component I get decreased, so that the aggregate demand decreases. So that's what happens due to the first one. This is not the answer. Why? අපි දැන් හොයන්නේ මේ options වලින් අපි හොයන්නේ from which option the aggregate demand increases. ඔන්නක තමයි අපි හොයන්නේ. හැබැයි මේකෙන් වෙන්නේ aggregate demand decreases. Right, look at the second one. An increase in personal income taxes. So similar to the interest rate, when the personal income tax get increased, what will happen? අර කතන්දරේම තමයි, people will not spend money for consumption activities. මොකද හේතුව, personal income taxes are really high, so that they will be demotivated to spend money. Then the aggregate demand again decreases. Now look at this third one. It says a decrease in real rate of interest. So what is this real rate of interest? So this is the equation of calculating this real rate of interest. Real rate of interest is equal to nominal rate of interest, which is the interest that the bank charges when they offer loans to the general public, right? The nominal rate of interest minus inflation rate, right? Minus inflation rate. What could happen? Now, in this given economy, this real rate of interest, see what happens to that? The real rate of interest decreases. How does that decrease? See, if this decreases, there are only two possible reasons for this decrease. The first one, a decrease in nominal rate of interest, if not, the increase in inflation rate. අපි මේකෙන් වෙනම අරගෙන කතන්දරය කරමු. එතකොට ඔයාලට තේරෙයි මේක හොඳටම. So when the nominal rate of interest is decreased, see, the bank charges lower amount of interest rate when the general public obtain loans. And then what will happen? The general public will be more willing to obtain those loans, and by obtaining those loans, what do? They engage in consumption activities and they engage in investment activities. So see, when the bank charges lower interest rates, the consumption increases, investment increases, so that the aggregate demand also increases. See, aggregate demand increases. And when aggregate demand increases beyond the level that is needed to maintain this full employment level of national income, you will see this demand pull inflation in the economy. හොඳයි. ඒ මම කතා කළේ මේක ඇතුලේ තියෙන components දෙකෙන් එකක් ගැන විතරනේ. ඒතර අපි බලමු අනිත් එකෙන් මොකද වෙන්නේ කියලා. What if the inflation rate increases? Because then again, when the inflation rate increases, again the real rate of interest decreases. So what does that mean? When the inflation rate increases, what happens in the economy? The prices just increase gradually, right? Prices get increased continuously. In the short run, what will happen? If prices are increasing gradually, what will happen in the short run? මිනිස්සු හෙට වියදම් කරන්න නැත්නම් හෙට ගන්න හිතන් ඉන්න good එක, හෙට ගන්න හිතන් ඉන්න product එක අද ගන්නවා. ඇයි එහෙම මම කියන්නේ? මොකද ඒක හෙට ගත්තොත් price will be very higher than the price that they pay today. ඒගොල්ලෝ හෙට ඒ investment එක කළොත්, then they will have to incur a greater outflow than the outflow that they would make today. ඒ නිසා හෙට ගන්න හිතන් ඉන්න product එක අද ගන්නවා. මොකද හෙට ගත්තොත් ඒකේ price එක වැඩි. හෙට කරන්න හිතන් ඉන්න investment එක අද කරනවා. මොකද හෙට කරන්න ඉදියොත් එහෙම outflow එක වැඩි. See, that is the reason. ඒතර due to that what will happen? හෙට ගන්න තියෙන දේ අද අරගෙන කනවා නම් මොකද වෙන්නේ? consumption will increase. හෙට කරන්න තියෙන investment එක අද කරනවා නම් again investment will again increase in the short run. So that මේ දෙකෙන් කොයික වුණත් even if the nominal rate of interest decreases or the inflation rate increases, what happens to the aggregate demand? Aggregate demand will increase in the economy. And when aggregate demand increases, as I mentioned earlier, there will be a demand pull inflation in the economy. You know, answer for this question 27 is this third one. But look at the other two options. The fourth one says a decrease in government spending. See, when the government spend more money, sorry, there's a decrease in government spending. So when the government spending a less amount of money, what happens to the aggregate demand? See, mainly this is the government spending, and what happens when government spending reduces? When government spending reduces, aggregate demand will anyway reduces. So this is not the answer there. Look at the fifth one. A decrease in money supply. See, when money supply decreases in the economy, usually what happens to the interest rate? Let me write here. When money supply, right? When money supply decreases, what happens to the interest rate? Interest rate usually increases. And when interest rates get increased, consumption will be demotivated, investment will be demotivated. මොකද මිනිස්සු loans අරගෙන consume කරන්නේ, invest කරන්නේ නැති නිසා. එහෙනම් what will happen at the end? Aggregate demand consists of these components. So when C and I get decreased, even the aggregate demand decreases. අපිට වමනා එක වෙන්නේ නැහැ. අපිට වමනාදී තමයි aggregate demand වැඩි වෙන්නේ. එහෙනම් answer for this question 27 is very much clear. So that's this third one. 28 question, right? Look at this 28 one. This says, suppose that all banks keep only the minimum reserves required by law and there are no currency rates. The legal reserve requirement is 10%, which is SRR. If a customer deposits 10,000 in a current account, what is the maximum amount of increase in total money supply? See, now what happens, again this question comes from money supply. So let me once again take this M1 money supply. So M1 money supply equals currency among the general public plus the demand deposits, right? Plus the demand deposits. So what happens now? A customer, again one person here, comes and deposits rupees 1,000 in the current account, in the demand deposit. එහෙනම් මොකද වෙන්නේ? Currency in circulation decreases by 1,000. මොකද එයාගේ අතේ තියෙන එයාගේ සාක්කුවේ තියෙන සල්ලි තමයි අර demand deposit එකට නැත්නම් current account එකට යන්නේ. එහෙනම් currency held by the general public decreases by 1,000, but this currency, whatever this 1,000 note, get passed to the commercial bank. So as a new deposit, එතකොට මොකද වෙන්නේ? This creates a multiplier effect. එතකොට අපි බලමු මුළු commercial banking system එකේම how much will be the total deposit due to this initial deposit. එහෙනම් අපි බලන්න ඕන total deposit equals, what's the equation we use? Initial deposit, right? Initial deposit into deposit multiplier. Initial deposit into deposit multiplier. So initial deposit is just 1,000 and the deposit multiplier is always 1 over SRR. So it's just 1,000 into 1 over SRR is 0.1. So simply 1,000 into 10, answer is 10,000. See, the currency held by the general public decreases by 1,000, but when this amount gets passed to the commercial bank as a demand deposit, it creates a total deposit of 10,000 in the economy. So that ultimately money supply, which is the total of these two components, get increased by how much? That get increased by 9,000. So the answer for this question 28 is third one. Right. Now look at this question 29. Right. In question 29, what do they say? Wait. In question 29, it says, if the government simultaneously engages in expansionary monetary and fiscal policies, which of the following is the effect on interest rate and unemployment? Right. So they talk about two things. The first one is expansionary monetary policy. The other one is again expansionary fiscal policy. So let me first take this expansionary monetary policy. Expansionary monetary policy. If the monetary policy is expansionary in nature, what will happen? Normally we say money supply will increase. How? By reducing the interest rates. So let me write first one. Interest rate will decrease. When interest rate is decreased, money supply increase. So this is the typical expansionary monetary policy. And then on the other side, what do they say? There's a expansionary fiscal policy as well, right? Expansionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy. So when the fiscal policy is expansionary in nature, what will happen? Government spending will be really high, right? So let me write expenditure. Government expenditure is very high, and then government income is somewhat lower. And see that now, if expenditure is higher than the income, definitely the government will have to borrow money. So public debt, right? Public debt may increase. So this is what will happen. එතකොට අපි දැන් මේකේ මොකද අපිට උමනා parts බැලුවොත් එහෙම කතන්දරේ මොකද්ද? We just need to recognize the impact on interest rate and also the impact on unemployment. එතකොට අපි බලමු. When the government expenditure, if not, in other words, when this component G, which is inside the aggregate demand, when it increases, what happens to the aggregate demand? See, as I wrote earlier, aggregate demand equals C plus I plus G plus NX. So when G, if not the government expenditure, when this increases, the aggregate demand also increases. And then, when aggregate demand increases, what happens to the level of production in the economy? Level of production. Producers are nikan inne. If there's a sufficient demand, producers will increase their production so that the level of production will increase. So when the level of production increases, they employ more and more resources. Again, ඒගොල්ලෝ laborers ලා අලුතෙන් hire කරන්න පුළුවන්, machineries අලුතෙන් utilize කරලා production එක කරන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ නිසා මොකද වෙන්නේ? Level of employment, right? Level of employment increases. But be careful. I just wrote here about the level of employment. I just told you that level of employment increases. But the question talks about the level of unemployment. It's obvious. If the level of employment increases, the level of unemployment obviously decreases. So that the answer has to be either this, if not this. If the interest rate, if the monetary policy is expansionary in nature, interest rate should definitely, not that it should definitely, but if you just take this independently, right? Expansionary monetary policy, if you just take it independently, yes, the interest rate should definitely decrease. එනිසා මේක වෙන්න බැහැ නම් ආන්සර්. ඒතර මෙතන මොකද්ද මේ තියෙන ප්‍රශ්නේ? ප්‍රශ්නේ තමයි මෙන්න මෙහෙම චූටි ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙන්නේ. මොකද්ද? When the government does both these together, right? When they apply this, again, central bank applies this expansionary monetary policy, and the government applies this expansionary fiscal policy. The central bank tries to increase the money supply by reducing the interest rates. එයාසේ government එකෙන් දෙගෙන මොකද කරන්නේ? They just try to increase their expenditure while reducing income so that they have a higher amount of public debt. So they need funds to cover this increasing expenditure. Right? They need funds to cover this increasing expenditure. And then what do they do? Then the government may obtain those funds from the domestic sources, especially from the domestic financial, banking sources. So what happens if the government asks money from the domestic banking sources? So inside the economy, we have banks, and government needs funds to cover their increasing expenditure. And so government comes and asks money from the, asks loans from the commercial banks. They have a limited amount of resources. Again, they have limited ability to create this credit in the economy. What happens when the public, when the government sector comes and asks for loans? It will reduce, right? It will reduce the funds available for private sector. Now there's a competition between the private sector and the public sector for the available funds in the commercial banks. So as a result of this competition, government asks for the loans, the general public, the private sector asks for the loans. So as a result of this competition, what could happen in the economy? The interest rates could go up, right? It could go up. I don't say that it goes up. I just say it could go up, so that we don't know what will really happen to the interest rates. If the government, right, does not find these funds from the domestic banking sources, this will not happen. But if they try to find these funds from the domestic banking sources, then the interest rates may go up due to this crowding out effect. So that we don't know, we can't be 100% certain on what happens to the interest rate in the economy. And that's why we should choose the answer as the fourth one. So the interest rate is indeterminate, but the unemployment definitely decreases. So that's how we find this answer for this question 29. Right, now look at this question 30. In question 30, it says, if 300 million deposit in a commercial bank leads to 3,000 million increase in the money supply, the reserve requirement must have been. Okay, so you just need to find this SRR based on these given information. Right, so this is somewhat, so I can say that this is like the opposite of this previous question we did. See, question 30 is like the opposite of this question 28, because in question 28 they say customer comes and deposit this much, and if the SRR is 10%, they just ask us to calculate the maximum amount of increase in the total money supply. So customer comes and deposit this thing, and SRR is 10%, and as a result, what could be the maximum increase in the money supply? And if you look at this question 30, that maximum increase in money supply is given to you, right? That is given to you, and by giving that, the question just asks you to find this statutory reserve ratio. So I can apply the same equation, right? So I can write again, money supply, let's say M1 money supply, right? Money supply equals currency held by the general public plus demand deposits, right? Demand deposits. What could happen? The money supply has increased by 3,000, right? Money supply has increased by 3,000. So what happened to the currency in circulation? Currency that is held by the general public. What happens to that? So I hope that you all see that in question 28, the question very clearly tells us that a customer deposits rupees 1,000 in the current account. And that's why we could reduce that whatever the amount deposited by this customer from the currency held by general public. What මතකනම් මේ ගන්න හදන වෙලාවේ මම මේක ලිව්වා -1000 කියලා. මොකද මෙතන කියලා තියෙනවා this customer comes and deposits money. But the problem in this question 30, that part is not given. Right? We don't know how this commercial bank receives this deposit. ඒතොර ඔයා හිතන්න එපා commercial bank එකට deposit එකක් එන්න තියෙන එකම විදිය customer කෙනෙක් ඇවිල්ලා සල්ලි දෙන එක කියලා. ඇයි එතකොට interbank call money market එකකින් එන cash ඒවට මොකද වෙන්නේ? ඒතර open market operations වලින් එන cash ඒවට මොකද වෙන්නේ? ඒ නිසා it's not always from the general public. So since this question doesn't mention anything with regard to that, we can't just say that the currency in circulation among the general public reduces by 300. So you just need to consider that as 0. There's no change in the currency in circulation among the general public, right? So that demand deposits should have increased by how much then? So the total increase of demand deposit has to be then, right? Demand deposit. Increase in demand deposit has to be 3,000. And if you remember, question 28, how did I calculate, right? How did I calculate that total increase in demand deposit? I just apply a simple equation. So total deposit equals, I wrote initial deposit multiplied by deposit multiplier. Total deposit equals initial deposit multiplied by deposit multiplier. Deposit multiplier. So total deposit is 3,000 as per the calculations we did previously. So that initial deposit is given to us as 300. Then you can find the deposit multiplier. Right? You can find the deposit multiplier. So how much is the deposit multiplier? That is simply 3,000 over 300. So that deposit multiplier is how much? That's 10. But is that the answer for the question? Do they ask us to recognize a deposit multiplier here in this question? See, they ask us to recognize a reserve requirement. I mean the statutory reserve ratio. That's what they ask us to calculate. And so look at this. So we found, see, this is the sequence. This is the order of doing this thing. So we first found the increase in total deposit. So you recognize that to be 3,000 and then you just check how could that happen. See, the total deposits get increased by this initial deposit into deposit multiplier. So using this equation, we just found the deposit multiplier. And if you remember, what's the equation of calculating this deposit multiplier? Deposit multiplier is always 1 over SRR. So if this is 10, right? And if this is anyway 1, that's a constant. How much is this SRR then? SRR has to be 1 over 10, which is 0.1. If not, in other words, as a percentage, 10%. So SRR is 10%, and this is the entire process of doing this calculation. Right? So the answer has to be third one. This is the answer. Right, now look at this question 31. It says, when a negative externality exists as a result of producing a good. Okay, so this is the point. You just need to understand that these negative externalities are there in the production, not in the consumption, but in the production. Then the socially optimum quantity of output could be achieved by, okay, we will first see the difference between this socially optimum quantity and the market allocation, right? We will first try to recognize that. ඊට පස්සේ අපිට පුළුවන් ප්‍රශ්නෙට උත්තරේ හොයාගන්න. Right, එහෙනම් look at this one. when there are negative externalities in the production, this is the demand curve. Let's say this is the demand curve based on private, let's say marginal private benefits. And let's say that this is the supply curve based on marginal private cost, right? So if there are negative externalities in the production, the marginal social cost has to be higher than the private cost. What did I tell you? Social cost has to be higher than the private cost if there are negative externalities in production. So if social cost is higher than the private cost, the supply that is decided based on that higher social cost has to be lower than the supply that is based on private cost. If social cost is greater, the supply curve gets shifted, right, to the left side. And so this is the supply curve which is based on marginal social cost. Now, if you analyze this diagram, here you see this is the market allocation, but this is the socially optimum allocation. If not, this is a socially optimum quantity. So the quantity based on the market forces, if not the quantity based on the private cost and private benefit, is higher than the socially optimum quantity. And then Gane kiyane mokadda? Socially optimum quantity of output could be achieved by. So to achieve this socially optimum quantity, you just need to try, not you, the government should try to reduce the market quantity. When the government reduces the market quantity, somehow the market quantity reaches the socially optimum quantity. From which one of the following options the market quantity will decrease, the production will decrease. And then following option, right? Look at this one. So let me show you this properly. Okay, now think about this. The first option says free market equilibrium. See, now just by allowing the market forces to decide the quantity, you can't achieve socially optimum quantity. So that's totally ignorable then. So this is not the answer there. The second one, subsidizing the production of output. Again, then government needs to try to reduce the production, but they just provide a subsidy to the producers. Then what will happen to the production? The production will increase further. This will worsen the given problem. So this is also not the answer then. The third one says placing limits on the quantity that can be considered now. Placing limits on the quantity means the government trying to limit the quantity that is produced by the suppliers. So when they limit the quantity, right, the quantity will obviously decrease. So this is a possible answer for this question 31. Then the fourth one says government purchases on the good. Again, that is purchased by the government. The producers will be motivated to produce more and more. No problem, the government purchase. This will again worsen the problem, not that it solves this thing. The fifth one says setting a minimum on the quantity that can be which means the government is trying to set a minimum quantity that should be produced by the producers. You think what will happen then? Then the producers will be motivated, they will be encouraged to exceed that limit, the minimum limit. So when they try to exceed that minimum limit, what will happen to the final quantity that is created in the market? That will increase. From this second option, from this fourth option, again from this fifth option, the market quantity may increase. The first one is ignorable, but from the other three, second, fourth, and fifth, market quantity will increase. So only from this third one, the market quantity will be limited, will be reduced. Anisa, answer for this question 31 is the third one. Right, now look at this question 32, which is very easy. This is what I don't really remember how many times they asked this thing. So marginal cost of allowing one more person to use a pure public, see, zero. It's always zero. Just look at the note. And then the 33rd question, a merit good is a good which, see that now, merit or demerit. So how do we decide that? We decide it simply based on the private benefits and the social benefits, right? So if both parties, I mean, if the direct party who's involved in the consumption activity and also the external parties who are indirectly involved in the consumption activity, if both parties have positive externalities, we recognize those goods as merit goods. ඔක තමයි අදහස. ඉතින් ඔය අදහස තියෙන ඔප්ෂන් එක තමයි ඔය සිලෙක්ට් කරන්න ඕන. First one says benefits both the recipient and society as well. 100% true. If it's a merit good, think about education, think about health. So education වැඩි වෙන්න education එක directly ගන්න කෙනා සහ මුළු society එකම will be benefited. And so this is obviously the answer. So first one is the answer. But we will go through the other points as usual. Does not have a social cost in production. We see that no, we don't have a particular label for these. Again, if there's no social cost in production, we don't have a specific label as merit, demerit. No, we don't have a label for that to recognize this thing. So ignorable thing. Third one, private benefits of consuming the good exceeds social benefit. So why is that? See that now, social benefit is lower than the private benefit, which means there are negative externalities in consumption. If so, how do we label these goods? We just label them as demerit goods, right? We label them as demerit goods. And then the fourth one, cannot be supplied through market forces, not to a certain extent. We can supply merit goods through the market, but that, you know, this the allocation or the supply that we receive from the market is not enough for merit goods. So cannot be, it can be supplied to a certain extent. So this is also not the answer there. Fifth one, can be supplied efficiently through the asidana. You can supply that through the market, but not efficiently. So this is also not the answer. Okay, so we'll move to this question 34. In question 34, it talks about the primary account balance of the government budget is defined as the difference between, okay, so these are like facts, right? You and me, I mean, we can't think about these things and change, right? We can't develop logics for these. These are facts. So how do we calculate this primary account balance? So let me write primary account balance is equal to, we can simply write total government receipts, right? Total government receipts. From this, we deduct, what do we deduct? Total government expenditure, right? Total government expenditure, remember, excluding interest expenditure, right? Excluding interest expenditure. So see, this is what I have written here. Primary account balance is equal to total government receipts. I use the word receipts, not the government revenue. Why? When I say receipts, it includes two components. And what are the two components? When I say receipts, it includes government revenue plus grants. So the government revenue may consist of tax revenue or non-tax revenue. So somehow, so these are the main two components inside receipts, the government revenue and the grants. So if you take the total of government revenue and grants, and if you deduct the total government expenditure excluding interest expenditure from that total, you get the primary account balance, right? So what's the answer then? The answer is very easy. See the now total revenue including grants and total expenditure excluding interest payment on debt. See that now when you get the difference between these two, what do we receive? We receive the primary account balance. So no point of going through the other options there, right? The next question, 35. The biggest component of government recurrent expenditure in Sri Lanka at present. See, you know that I'm not going to discuss these questions because they may change. Time to time, they may change. So the answer may not be relevant to your level year. So I'm skipping this. Right, look at this question 36. It says, comparative advantage means that one country can produce. Okay, so we have discussed this many times. If it's the absolute advantage, it's always about the highest productivity. And if it's about the comparative advantage, it's always the country with the lowest opportunity cost of producing one good or the given good. Right. So the question is from comparative advantage. So we will go through more of a certain product than another country. No, it's not about the productivity. Certain product at a lower marginal cost. No, it's not about the marginal cost. It's about the opportunity cost. It was a certain product at a lower long run average cost කියලා කිව්වට සාමාන්‍යයෙන් අපි කියනවා ඔයා ආන්සර් එක දන්නේ නැත්නම් අර lengthiest option එක තමයි ආන්සර් කියලා. හැබැයි මෙතනදී නම් එහෙම එකකුත් නැහැ. So this is also false. The fourth one says a certain product at lower opportunity cost than the other country, than another country. See, that is the answer, right? That's the answer. Ekamara easy, no point of discussing this thing. Okay, so we will move to this question 37. It says the table below shows the ability of country X and country Y to produce rice and coffee when they use all of their resources for that product. Okay, so the most important word here is the table below shows the ability to produce, which means this is the output approach, right? This is about the output approach. It's about the output approach. You know that when we calculate this comparative advantage, the equation changes. The equation of calculating opportunity cost changes based on the given approach. If it's the output approach, how do we find the opportunity cost of, let's say, good X? How do we find this? Why? එතකොට ගන්න equation එක තමයි delta y divided by delta x. අයි මේවා ගන්නේ මේක reciprocal එක මොකක්ද? මේවාර perfectly අපි කතා කරලා තියෙන කතන්දර. Anyway, for the time being, so if it's the output approach, this is how you calculate this opportunity cost of producing this good X. So it's delta y divided by delta x. ඊට පස්සේ ඔයා දැක්කම මේකේ options ටික they even talk about absolute advantage. So as I mentioned earlier, it's about the highest production, නැත්නම් it's about the highest productivity. Clear? So I think we will need to recognize both. එතකොට simply by looking at the given values, you can recognize a country with the absolute advantage. See, when it comes to output of rice, country X can produce 5,000, but country Y produce 10,000. So obviously the absolute advantage, let me write it here. Absolute advantage of rice goes to country Y. And see that now there's no absolute advantage when it comes to coffee for any of these countries. In this, we will calculate the opportunity costs as well. Right. So let me do those calculations on the provided table itself. If you are calculating this opportunity cost of good X, it's delta Y over delta X. So the considered good comes to the denominator. And if it's about rice, right? The rice must be in the denominator. මතක තියාගන්න මේ table එකේ country X තියෙන්නේ මේ අතට. එතකොට you need to calculate the opportunity cost of each country for each product. රටවල් දෙක පටලව ගත්තොත් එතනම අපි ඉවරයි. Enisa, when you calculate the opportunity cost of producing rice in country X, මොකද කරන්න ඕනේ? coffee value එක ඊට උඩට දාලා rice value එක ඊට යටට දැම්මම you receive 1 and that's the opportunity cost of producing rice. When it comes to coffee production again in country X, you take the rice production change in rice and the change in coffee. So once again the opportunity cost is 1. Now only we move to this country Y. So when it comes to country Y, if you need to find this opportunity cost of producing rice, put that into the denominator and put the other good to the numerator. So you receive 0.5, right? You receive 0.5. So on the other side, what do we get? It's 10 over 5, which is 2. Now you can recognize the country with the lowest opportunity cost for each good. Then අපි එක බලන්නේ අර product එක base කරගෙන. For rice, the opportunity cost in country X is 1, but for rice, the opportunity cost in country Y is 0.5. So country Y has the lowest opportunity cost when it comes to the production of rice. And then look at the other product. When it comes to coffee, the opportunity cost of producing coffee in country X is 1, but that in country Y is 2. So obviously, the lowest opportunity cost, if not the comparative advantage for producing coffee, goes to country X. So if you know these things, you can find the answer easily. So look at this one. Country X has comparative advantage in producing rice. No, it's the opposite, right? Country X has comparative advantage in producing coffee. Yes, that's what we calculated and recognized. Country X has the lowest opportunity cost when it comes to the production of coffee. So answer for this question 37 is the second one. Right. Look at this question 38 now. This says, what is the formula used to calculate a country's commodity terms of trade? So terms of trade is typically calculated as export price index divided by import price index into 100. But if they specifically ask us to give the equation for commodity terms of trade, it has to be the export price index of commodities divided by import price index of commodities into 100. That has to be the equation. But from the 5 provided answers, we just need to pick the third one because that's the most suitable out of the 5. Right. Question 39. Which of the following items is not included in the current account of country's balance of payments? Okay. So we know if it is the current account in BOP, balance of payments, there are 4 sub-accounts there. Right? In the current account, there are 4 sub-accounts. The first one is this trade account. Second one is services account. The third one is about primary income account. And the last one is about secondary income account. So these are the 5 sub-accounts we find in the current account in balance of payments. Okay, so the question asks us to recognize which of the following is not included in the current account. If not, which of the following is not included in any of these sub-accounts, right? So that's what the question asks us to recognize. Look at the first one, invisible exports. Where do we record these invisible exports? We record them in services account, right? We record them in services account. Second one, interest payment on foreign loans. See that now, interest payment on foreign loans, where do we record it? We record this thing in primary income account. Third one, profits earned from foreign investments. Once again, this goes under primary income account. Fourth one, purchasing of foreign securities. See that now, purchasing of foreign securities, we do not record in any of these accounts instead we record it in the financial account, right? We record this in the financial account, and specifically under financial account also, we record it under portfolio account, right? Portfolio investment account. So that's a specific account in which we record this fourth one. Fifth one, food aid donated by United Nations organization. So these aids donated by the UN, we record them in secondary income account, right? We record it in secondary income account. So all these, I mean, the first one, the second one, the third one, and the fifth one are recorded in any of the sub accounts in current account, except this fourth one. So that is the answer for this question 39. Right. Look at this question 40 now. In which of the following circumstances could the International Monetary Fund be called in to assist a country? Okay, so imagine the first one, there's a trade dispute. If there's a trade dispute, the relevant international organization has to be World Trade Organization, because this is something directly related to trade. So World Trade Organization. And the second one, a balance of payment crisis, like the one that we had in Sri Lanka. So then obviously, who helped us? IMF mainly. So third one, foreign investment dispute. So maybe we can write here, it's World Bank related issue. Fourth one, an infrastructure funding shortage. Once again, it could be a World Bank related issue. And fifth one, an economic recession. Even this we can put under World Bank. So from the 5 options that they have provided, the most suitable one where we see or where we get the support of IMF is this second one, the balance of payment crisis.
All right, now look at this question 41. It says, under which circumstances would the devaluation of currency be able to reduce the deficit in the current account balance of payment? So for this deficit in the current account to reduce, what needs to happen? Foreign currency inflow has to be greater than the foreign currency outflow. So simple as that. But we know that just because the devaluation of domestic currency happens, it doesn't always ensure that our export revenue go up than the import expenditure, right? But if devaluation happens when the Marshall-Lerner conditions get satisfied, of course, we can be 100% certain that the devaluation benefits to that given country. So what is this Marshall-Lerner condition? According to the Marshall-Lerner condition, if the price elasticity of demand for exports plus the price elasticity of demand for imports, right? Price elasticity of demand for exports plus the price elasticity of demand for imports. If this is greater, if the sum is greater than 1, what will happen? Devaluation of domestic currency will definitely increase the export revenue and decrease the import expenditure, right? So from the provided answers, we just need to pick the one which gives us the summation of these two greater than 1, right? So the first option says price elasticity of demand for exports is 0.6 and the elasticity of import is 0.1. So when you get the total, that's just 0.7. And in the second one, it's 0.5. In the third one, it's 1.0. And then the fourth one is 0.9. In the fifth one, it's 1.4. So from the provided 5 options, the Marshall-Lerner condition gets satisfied only from the fifth one. The අපි හිතමුකෝ 1 වලට වඩා වැඩි 2 3ක් මෙතන තිබුණා කියලා. If so, you need to pick the one that gives you the highest value. But from these provided ones, right, the PED of exports and the PED of imports being greater than 1 only in the fifth option. So that is the answer for this question 41.
Right, and look at this question 42 now. It says at present, see that now this also may change, but at present, the value of SDR consists of the weighted value of 5 major currencies, namely. All right, so SDR stands for special drawing rights. So these special drawing rights, the value of these special drawing rights is calculated as the weighted average of 5 major currencies. And right now, what are the 5 major currencies that are considered? So these are facts. There's no logic here. I mean, you just need to get whatever the provided information. So the 5 major currencies that are considered when evaluating the value of SDR is US dollar, British pound, Japanese yen, euro, and Chinese yuan. So these are the 5 major currencies. Right, look at this question 43. How many sustainable development goals have been agreed by all nations as part of 2030 agenda for sustainable development? So if you just refer the note, you will have this value. And this is again something specific. This is also a fact. So there are 17 sustainable development goals, right? Exactly 17. 44, according to the Household Income and Expenditure Survey 2016, which is not relevant to your exam, so we can skip this question 44. Right, look at this question 45 now. This says one of the components in Human Development Index. I think in almost all the papers we did, we got one question from Human Development Index. So now, by now, you should know these things. So the component that is in Human Development Index is this life expectancy at birth. So these are again facts. You just need to refer the note and that's it. Right. 46. Economic development refers to. So what's development? Is it a synonym for economic growth like they have suggested in the first option? So these are two things. When it comes to economic growth, it's much more quantitative, right? In economic growth, we only evaluate the increase in real output, right? Increase in real output. That is not a synonym for economic development, because when it comes to economic development, it's something that comprises both quantitative and qualitative aspects. So the second suggested answer says economic growth with changes in output distribution and economic structure, which I think is the most suitable out of these 5 options that they have provided. Because if you just look at the third one is simply ignorable. See the now. It says improvement in the well-being of urban population. And is that development? So see the now. It talks only about the urban population. And anyone can understand that this is irrelevant. Fourth one, sustainable increase in gross national income. See, sustainable increase, sustainable is, I mean, that term is there, but then again, they just talk about the increase in GNI, which is again only quantitative. Fifth one, removal of income disparity of population. See, it's just related to income distribution, So from the 5 options that they have given us, the most suitable one is the second one. So in the second one, they say economic growth with the changes in output distribution and economic structure. So when they say output distribution, it refers to how income is distributed and how the output is distributed based on the income. And when they say changes in economic structure, they are referring that whether the economy is moving from agriculture-based economy to production-based or maybe service-based economy, right? So those are the structural changes in economy. So from the 5 options, this has to be the most suitable, right? 47th one, which one of the following economic issues can be evaluated with the use of Lorenz curve? See that now? The Lorenz curve is something that we use to present the relative income distribution. So using this Lorenz curve, we can evaluate the inequality of income distribution. So that's it, right? That's it. That's the only use of Lorenz curve. So the first one says the allocative and productive efficiencies in markets. No, for that you need to use a PPC, not a Lorentz curve. And then the second one says comparative advantage in trading partners and the terms of trade. No, we don't evaluate that graphically. Third one, degree of specialization and growth within countries. Specialization, you can evaluate it using Lorentz curve, or even you can evaluate the growth using a Lorentz curve. The fourth one says equilibrium of market prices. This is not totally, ignorable with regard to the Lorentz curve. This is ignorable. Fifth one, the degree of inequality in income distribution. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, this Lorentz curve you can use to evaluate the relative inequality in relative income distribution. So that's true then. 48. This says the table below shows employment data for a hypothetical economy. So you get the years, and then we have population, and from the population they have derived this working age population, and again we get the data related to number of employed and the number of unemployed people. So just to clarify, right, all the working age population we don't recognize to be a part of labor force. So labor force consists of both employed and unemployed population who are within the working age group. If you just calculate the labor force in this country, so what are the values you get? We get 15 here, we have 16, we get 25, we get 30, again we have 30. So those are the values coming for labor force in each year. And if you look at the real requirement of the question, it says in which year is the rate of unemployment 20% and the labor force participation rate is 60%. So how do we find this unemployment rate, if not rate of unemployment? It is calculated using this simple equation. We write unemployed population over, we write labor force into 100, and we will put the values related to this year 1. And unemployed population in year 1 is 3, right? That's 3, and the labor force is 15. So you divide by 15 and you multiply by 100. So how much you receive? You receive 20%. So that it matches with the given value in the question. And let's see how much is the labor force participation rate in the first year, right? So how do we find this labor force participation rate? How do we find this? That is labor force in the given country divided by the total working age population into 100. So we will check the value in year 1. Labor force is 15 and working age population that is given to us as 25 into 100, which is 4 into 15. How much is that? That is 60, right? That's 60. So fortunately, the first year itself is the answer. You will have to check all these other given years. And yes, answer is the first part. Right. 49th one, it says, what can the economic development policy implemented in Sri Lanka during the period 1962 1977? අපි simply එකට කියනවා ඒක closed economy period එකක් කියලා. එහෙම නැත්නම් මෙතන තියෙන options වලින් මෙතන closed economy කියලා එකක් නැති නිසා we will recognize that to be the second answer, inward oriented import substitution policy. So that's the most suitable answer out of the 5 provided answers. Right. 50th, the top 3 sectors contributed to foreign exchange earnings of Sri Lanka in the recent years are. Okay, so the same story. I mean, this answer may not be relevant to your A-level year. So I'm going to skip this question 50.